The Accord Hall smelled like recycled atmosphere and old ambition. Calder Mace had been inside it for 6 days now, and he still hadn't figured out whether the smell was built into the ventilation system, or whether it was something the station itself secreted, some byproduct of 300 years of treaties signed and broken, and signed again in slightly different ink. The hall was a neutral ground installation, orbiting a gas giant no one had claimed because the gas giant wasn't worth claiming, which was precisely why it had been chosen. Neutral ground required the absence of advantage. The Accord Hall had been constructed on the assumption that even the act of wanting something, a window view, a favorable atmospheric mix, a chair at a table that was 12 centimeters closer to the center, gave someone an edge, and so everything here was deliberately, exhaustingly equal. The chairs were identical. The lighting was uniform. The air temperature was a compromise between 17 atmospheric preferences that satisfied none of them completely. Calder found it restful. He was not a delegate. He was not technically a diplomat. His title, according to his badge and the Accord's internal roster, was Civilian Attaché, 3rd Tier, United Earth Assembly, Observational Rotation *, which meant he had been sent here to watch, take notes, and produce a summary document that would be read by perhaps 4 people in the UEA's mid-level administrative office before being filed in a directory. No one opened more than once a year. He had been sent because the UEA's 1st-tier attaché had broken her wrist in a transit accident 3 days before departure, and the 2nd-tier attaché had a documented allergy to the hall's ventilation blend. Calder was 3rd. He was here because everyone above him was not. He had decided, after the initial mild humiliation of this realization, that it was fine. He sat in the observer's gallery, a raised arc of seats behind the main floor, separated from the delegate tables by a low barrier of pale composite stone, and he watched. The gallery was rarely full. Most observers rotated through briefly, took their notes, and retreated to the station's common areas, where the atmospheric compromises were less severe, and the chairs had some variation in cushion thickness. Calder stayed. He had nowhere pressing to be, and he found the proceedings genuinely interesting in the way that very complex things become interesting once you stop trying to understand them entirely and simply watch their surface. The Accord was in its 14th day of what was formally called a * continuity session, a review of existing treaties rather than a negotiation of new ones, which meant the emotional temperature was lower than it might have been, the speeches longer, and the silences between them more loaded with accumulated history. Calder took notes on the silences. He had begun to believe they were more informative than the speeches. On the morning of the 7th day, the Vhari delegation arrived. He knew they were Vhari before he saw them because the hall's ambient light shifted, a brief, involuntary dimming that the lighting system seemed to produce in response to the bioluminescence of the delegation members, the way a room gets quieter when something louder enters. The delegates came through the east corridor in a formation of 9, 8 figures in deep charcoal court dress, and at the center, one figure who was taller than the others by a full head and whose skin, even at this distance, held a slow silver-white light that pulsed with a rhythm that was almost but not quite like breathing. Calder knew approximately 3 things about the Vhari from his pre-mission briefing materials. 1. They were among the oldest recognized sovereign states in the Accord, with a continuous governmental record of roughly 11,000 years. 2. Their ruling line was matrilineal and unbroken, which meant the woman at the center of that delegation, the one with the pulse under her skin, was not merely a queen in a ceremonial sense, but the actual governing body of a civilization that had been negotiating treaties with other civilizations before Earth's recorded history began. 3. Vhari memory was, in some way that the briefing materials had not explained clearly, biological, not metaphorical. The briefing had used the word * genetic, and then immediately hedged it with approximate asterisk and layperson adjacent, and Calder had come away with the impression that nobody in the UEA's administrative office fully understood what it meant either. He watched her take her seat. She moved without hurry. The 8 members of her delegation arranged themselves around her with the precision of people who had been practicing this specific choreography for a long time, and she settled into her chair, which was identical to every other chair in the hall, per the Accord's equalizing protocols, with the particular ease of someone who understands that a chair is a chair, and the room responds to you regardless. Her eyes swept the floor, the walls, the gallery. When they passed over Calder, they stopped. Not for long. A second, perhaps less. The pale, colorless irises held on him for a moment that registered as attention without being long enough to confirm itself, and then they moved on, and she turned to her delegation's briefing materials, and the session resumed. Calder looked down at his notes. He had written nothing in the last 4 minutes. He wrote, Vhari delegation arrived. Queen present. Bioluminescence notable, silver-white, slow pulse, deepens slightly when she's still. He looked at this. He added, she looked at the gallery. Then he crossed that out because it was not the kind of observation that belonged in a summary document read by 4 people in an administrative office. He was here to watch. He was watching. This was fine. On the 8th day, she looked at the gallery again. He was in the same seat. The observer's gallery did not have assigned positions, but Calder had developed the habit of sitting in the same place, 3rd seat from the left end, 2nd row, because it gave him a direct sightline to the main floor without requiring him to lean. He had been there every session. He had not thought of this as notable. The queen of the Vhari continuum looked at the gallery at the start of the morning session, found him in approximately the amount of time it takes to locate something you were already looking for, and then looked away. He thought about this more than he should have, which he acknowledged to himself without particular concern. He was a 3rd-tier attaché in an observer's gallery. She was an 11,000-year dynasty in a chair that was identical to every other chair. The gap between these positions was not romantic or dramatic, it was simply astronomical. Whatever she was looking at, if she was looking at him specifically, which he was probably imagining, it was not the beginning of anything. It was a curiosity, at most. Humans were novel here. He might simply be the most visually distinct thing in the gallery on those particular mornings. He wrote in his notes, session resumed without incident. Then he looked at the gas giant through the hall's outer window for a while, its banded surface slow and enormous and indifferent. On the 9th day he arrived late, a malfunction in the transit corridor, a crowd of secondary delegates rerouted, and when he reached the gallery his usual seat was occupied. He took a seat at the far right of the 2nd row instead, against the wall, half obscured by a structural column. He was watching the session resume when he noticed that the queen had arrived after him. Her delegation was still arranging itself. She was standing, and she was looking at the gallery, and something about the quality of that look, the way it moved through the rows with more purpose than a general survey, made him understand that she was looking for his usual seat, and finding it occupied by a delegate from the Sorvathi observer pool, and the pause that followed was brief but present. Then she found him against the wall. The pause was different this time, longer. Her head turned a few degrees to orient on him and then simply held, and even at this distance, even with the gallery's elevated position and the distance between them, he could see, or he thought he could see, that the pulse in her skin had changed. The rhythm of it, the slow silver light under the surface of her face and her hands, and the places where her skin was visible above her collar. The rhythm had quickened by something small and unmeasurable, and absolutely distinct. Then the session opened, and she looked away, and Calder sat against the wall behind the column and tried to take notes. He wrote, the light changes when she. He stopped, he crossed it out entirely. He was a 3rd-tier attaché. He was here because everyone above him had a broken wrist or a documented allergy. He was going to produce a summary document that 4 people would read and file. He was watching, that was all. Part 2, The Gallery. On the evening of the 9th day, after the session had closed and the delegates had filtered out through their respective corridors, Calder went to the hall's outer observation gallery. It was a different space from the observers section, a long, curved corridor with a transparent outer wall that looked directly at the gas giant, maintained as a rest area for delegates and visitors who found the closed interior of the hall oppressive after long sessions. It was usually quiet in the evenings. The gas giant was worth looking at, in the way that enormous, indifferent things are always worth looking at. He was standing at the window, his forehead not quite against the glass, watching the banded surface rotate in its deep and patient way, when he heard footsteps behind him that were not the footsteps of the 3 or 4 other people who had drifted in and out of the gallery in the last hour. He turned. She was standing at the gallery entrance. Alone, which was not usual. The Vhari delegation traveled in formation. The briefing materials had noted this, and single unaccompanied movement was uncommon for the ruling line. She was wearing her court dress, the deep charcoal, but she had removed something, a formal outer layer, a collar piece, some component of official presentation, and what remained was simpler, and he could see more clearly the way the bioluminescence moved through the skin of her throat and her bare forearms, the slow silver-white light with that rhythmic pulse beneath. She was looking at him. He said, carefully, "Your continuance." It was the correct formal address for the Vhari ruling line, per the briefing materials, and it was approximately all he had from the briefing materials on the subject of correct Vhari etiquette. She said something in Vhari first, a short phrase, 2 or 3 words, and then switched to Accord Standard without apparent effort. "You sit in the gallery every day." "I'm an observer," he paused, 3rd tier. Something moved across her face that might have been the beginnings of something warmer than formal acknowledgement. "I know what tier you are." I looked at the roster. He did not know what to do with this, so he said nothing, which had generally served him better than saying the wrong thing. She came to stand beside him at the window. Not close, a respectful distance, a formal distance, but beside him, oriented toward the gas giant rather than toward him, which made the conversation easier in a way he hadn't anticipated. "The hall makes some people restless," she said. "They come here to look at something large." "Does it make you restless?" She considered the question with the seriousness he was beginning to understand she gave to questions that deserved it. "Not restless. I find it clarifying. Things that are very old and very large remind me that I am neither the oldest nor the largest thing that exists, which I sometimes need to remember." He looked at the gas giant. "That's a good use for a gas giant." "Your people named it GJ 7741. We have a different name for it. Older." "What does your name mean?" "The thing that was here before memory." She said it simply, without ceremony. "Our names tend to be statements rather than labels." He thought about this. "That's a better name." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, I have been looking at you in the sessions." He had known this was coming and still didn't have a prepared response for it. "I noticed." "I thought you might have." She turned slightly to look at him directly rather than at the window. Her eyes in this light were very pale, colorless, or very nearly like water over stone, and there was something in them that he couldn't name, a kind of intensity that was not pressure but was very close to it. "Do you know why?" "I assumed I was novel. Humans are not the most common observer species here." "That is true." She looked at the window again. "But there are 3 other human observers in the gallery rotation. I have not looked at them." He had no answer for this. He stood beside her at the window and they both looked at the gas giant, which was doing what it always did, rotating slowly, patiently, without caring about any of them. "I don't know why," she said finally quietly. "That is what makes it interesting. I should know. I am Vhari. Our memory does not forget. What does that mean? She was silent for a moment that felt like it had weight. I will tell you, she said, when I understand it myself. Then she turned and walked back toward the gallery entrance, and the light under her skin pulsed once, a single deep violet to silver shift, like something surfacing briefly before returning to depth, and she was gone. Calder stood at the window for a long time. The gas giant rotated, the banded surface moved. Everything that was old and large continued being old and large, without comment. He looked at his notes when he got back to his quarters. He had written nothing useful in the last several hours. He wrote, spoke with the Queen in the outer gallery. She looked at the roster. He put the notes away. He looked at the ceiling of his quarters, which was the same as every other ceiling on the station, uniform, equalizing, deliberately without character, and thought about the word asterisk memory and what it might mean for a species for whom memory was not stored in the mind but somewhere older. He did not sleep well. He went to the gallery the next morning and sat in his usual seat, third from the left, second row, and when the Vhari delegation arrived, the Queen sat in her chair and looked at the gallery and found him, and this time she didn't look away. Part 3. What the Vhari remember. On the 11th day, the session was interrupted. It was not a political interruption, no formal objection, no point of order from one of the 6 voting blocks. It was something else, a disruption in the Vhari section of the floor, voices lowered in rapid Vhari exchange, the 8 delegation members forming a tight configuration around their queen in a way that was protective rather than ceremonial. Calder watched from the gallery. He could not hear what was being said. He could see the Queen at the center of the formation, very still, in the way that things become still when they are processing rather than responding. And he could see that the pulse in her skin had changed again, not quickened this time but deepened, the silver light pressing toward violet, a color he was beginning to associate with something significant happening below the surface. The session was suspended. The floor representative of the Accord's presiding body announced a recess of 2 hours and gave no reason, which meant the reason was something the presiding body did not want formalized in the record. Calder stayed in the gallery. After 20 minutes, one of the Vhari delegation, a woman with close-cropped silver hair and the compact precision of someone whose job is to manage problems before they become visible, came to the gallery entrance and looked at Calder directly. The Queen asks if you will come, she said. He blinked. Come where? The Sovereign Suite. A pause. It is a request, not a protocol requirement. You may decline. He thought about this for approximately 4 seconds. I won't decline, he said. The Sovereign Suite was one of the few spaces on the station that wasn't subject to the hall's equalizing protocol. Delegations of significant historical standing were permitted a private room, the logic being that the capacity to conduct private deliberation was itself a form of equity, since not having one was a disadvantage. The Vhari Sovereign Suite was at the end of a long corridor, behind a door made of something that was not the station's standard composite, something darker, heavier, older. Inside, it looked like the station and didn't. The walls were the same, the floors the same, but the Vhari had brought objects, not furniture, but things, the kind of things that accumulate around a civilization the way sediment accumulates around stone. A reading surface covered in materials he couldn't identify. A freestanding light source that pulsed very slowly in silver white. A glass case with something inside it that he thought might be a piece of technology, and then, on closer inspection, thought might be a piece of something biological. The Queen was standing at the window. The suite had a small window that looked at the same gas giant from a slightly different angle, with her back to the door. She didn't turn when he entered. The delegation member with the silver hair gestured him toward a chair, and then withdrew to the room's periphery. You came, the Queen said. You asked. She turned then. In the smaller space, the bioluminescence was more visible. The silver-white light was present across more of her skin than the court dress usually revealed, moving in that slow rhythm, and her eyes were doing something he hadn't seen before. The colorless irises were edged with pale gold, just at the rim, like a tide coming in at the boundary of something. "My First Minister is concerned," she said. "She believes I am behaving unusually." He glanced toward the silver-haired woman at the room's edge. "Is she right?" "Yes," she said it without defensiveness. "I am behaving unusually. I have been looking at a third-tier UEA attaché in the observer's gallery for 4 days, which is not a thing I have done before, and I came to find him alone in the outer gallery, which is also not a thing I have done before, and now I have called him to the sovereign suite, which—" "Also not a thing you've done before," Calder said. "No." She moved to a chair across from him and sat, and in the sitting down she was somehow less formal, or not less formal exactly, but less contained, more present, more there. The way a person becomes more visible when they stop performing. "I need to explain to you what I told you last night," she said, imprecisely. "You said your memory doesn't forget." "Yes, but that is not only a personal fact, it is a physiological one." She folded her hands. Her fingers were very long, the joints slightly more articulated than human hands, and the bioluminescence ran all the way to the tips. "Vhari memory is ancestral. What I remember is not only what I have experienced in my lifetime. I carry the memories of my mother's line, and her mother's line, and so on, back through 11,000 years of continuous record. Every significant bond, every relationship that carried weight in a Vhari life, is encoded and passed forward." He was quiet following this. "A bond between a Vhari and a being of another species," she continued, "is rarer, but it is not unprecedented, and it encodes the same way. The pattern persists. If my ancestor formed a real bond with a being from outside our species, I carry that pattern. I carry the shape of it, the resonance of it, even if I have never met the being or anything like the being." The gold at the edge of her eyes had deepened slightly. "When I saw you in the gallery," she said, "I recognized a pattern." Calder took a breath. "A pattern from very far back." She was watching him carefully. "I did not know what it was at first. I knew only that something registered when I looked at you, and I am not accustomed to not knowing what my memory is doing. So I looked at the roster and I confirmed that you were human, and I began—" She stopped. "I began looking further back." "How far back?" She was quiet for a moment. "Far enough that the record is not complete, far enough that what I carry is not a clear memory but a shape. A residue." The gold in her eyes was fully visible now, a ring of warm light against the pale iris. "A human, male, not a delegate, someone who was present in a Vhari space at a moment of great difficulty, and who stayed when he didn't have to, and who—" She stopped again. "Who what?" "Who was seen," she said quietly, "by a Vhari woman who had not been expecting to see anyone." The room was very still. Calder looked at his hands. He looked at the gas giant through the small window. He looked at the woman across from him, who was 11,000 years of continuity, and who was looking at him with a ring of gold light at the edge of her eyes that he did not think she was producing deliberately. "I'm not that person," he said. "Whoever she knew, whoever it was that far back, I'm not them." "No," she agreed, "you are not." "So the pattern—" "The pattern is real," she said. "The resonance is real. What it means that I carry it in connection to you." She paused. "That I don't know yet. That is why I needed you to come here." He sat with this. He was a third-tier attaché from the UEA's administrative office. He had a summary document to produce. He was here because of a broken wrist and a documented allergy. "What does it feel like," he asked, "when the pattern activates?" She considered the question seriously, in the way she considered everything. "Like remembering something that hasn't happened yet," she said. like the shape of something that exists but hasn't been filled in. She met his eyes, and the gold in hers had settled into something steady rather than tidal. "I think," she said very carefully, "that you should stay through the rest of the session." Part 4, the court's opinion. The first minister's name was Teva, and she did not approve. She did not say so in the Queen's presence, and she did not say so in Calder's presence, but she conveyed it through the particular quality of her silences when she was required to interact with him, and through the precision with which she placed herself between him and the Queen's immediate vicinity whenever the Accord's protocol didn't require otherwise. She was not rude. She was exquisitely correct. But correctness, Calder was learning, could be a form of exclusion when wielded by someone who had been practicing it for decades. He didn't take it personally. He was a third-tier attaché from Earth who had been invited into the sovereign suite of an 11,000-year dynasty on the basis of what was, by any external measure, a very strange explanation. If he had been in Teva's position, he would probably have had opinions too. He watched her when he wasn't watching the sessions, and he tried to understand what she was protecting. She was protecting the Queen, that was clear. Not politically, or not only politically. There was something personal in the precision of her management, the way she tracked the Queen's location in any room, and the way her body oriented automatically toward disruption the moment before it happened. She had been doing this for a long time. The Queen was not unaware of it. The Queen accepted it with the ease of someone who has decided that this particular form of care is worth receiving even when it is occasionally also a restriction. On the 12th day, Teva stopped Calder in the transit corridor. "I want to explain something to you," she said, without preamble. She was using Accord standard but very precisely, with the care of someone who speaks it as a second language and knows exactly where the edges are. "All right. What the Queen carries is not a small thing. The ancestral memory is not metaphorical and it is not symbolic. It is biological. When she tells you that a pattern activated, she is describing a physiological event, a real response in her memory system to a real stimulus. That response has never been triggered in her lifetime by any being outside our species. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "I think so. I am telling you that you are in a position that you did not seek and did not earn and may not be equipped for, and that she is in a position she has never been in before, and that the Vhari court will have opinions about both of these things that will be loudly expressed and politically significant, and that will place her under a pressure you will not be able to fully protect her from." Teva's eyes were level and clear. "I am not telling you to leave. I have watched her for 40 years. I have seen her be many things. I have not seen her be this." A pause. "I am telling you to understand what it is." He held her gaze. "I do," he said. "Or I'm trying to." Teva looked at him for a moment longer, the way you look at something you're trying to take an accurate measurement of. "Good," she said and walked away. On the 13th day, the Accord's secondary session included a block report from the Sorvathi delegation that referenced the Vhari Continuum's historical territorial compact in a way that was technically within the bounds of Accord protocol, and was also, clearly, a provocation. The Sorvathi representative presented the reference with the care of someone who has constructed an insult to be indistinguishable from a citation. Calder watched from the gallery. The Queen was very still. The pulse in her skin was in the range he was beginning to associate with controlled restraint, the silver light present but minimal, very close to the surface, nothing deeper showing. She let the Sorvathi representative finish. She let the 2 beats of silence that followed sit in the room. Then she addressed the hall in Accord standard, her voice carrying the particular quality of very old authority, which is not volume but density. "The Sorvathi reference to Article 11 of the Vhari Territorial Compact," she said, "is correctly cited. It is also cited without the context of the 2,400-year amendment record that modifies its application, which I am happy to provide. In full." The Sorvathi representative, indicated he would not require the full record. "Then we proceed," she said. The session moved on. In the gallery, Calder exhaled. He wrote in his notes, "Queen handled the Sorvathi provocation without raising her voice." He paused. He added, "The light changed just before she spoke, settled just after." He looked at this for a long time, and then, for the first time, he did not cross it out. That evening she came to the outer observation gallery again. He was there before her, which he suspected she had expected. "The Sorvathi have been doing versions of that for 900 years, she said, coming to stand beside him at the window, closer than the first time. "Does it get easier?" "No, but it gets more predictable, which is almost the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know more?" "About the pattern?" She turned to look at him, and the gold was present in her eyes again, not tidal now but constant, a steady warm edging on the pale iris. "I do." "Will you tell me?" She looked at the gas giant. "The record is 3 generations back from my mother's line, which is," she calculated briefly, "approximately 1200 years ago. A Vhari scholar-keeper named Sarava who was stationed at a neutral ground archive, not unlike this." She gestured at the hall around them at the station. "A human researcher was assigned to the same archive, not a diplomat, someone who studied things, who was present in a space of difficulty. There was a challenge to the archive's neutrality, a political incursion, a period of significant pressure, and who did not leave when he could have. Who helped, in the way that someone without formal power helps, which is quietly and persistently and without requiring credit." He waited. "And Sarava saw him," she said. "That is the part the memory carries most strongly. Not the events, not the political resolution, the being seen, being looked at by someone who had no particular reason to look and no formal mechanism for seeing her accurately and who looked anyway." She turned back to him. The gold in her eyes was doing something he hadn't seen it do before, not an edging now but a spreading, moving slowly toward the center of the pale iris. "I told you it felt like remembering something that hasn't happened yet," she said. "Yes. I'm beginning to understand what that means." Part 5. The hall one last time. On the 14th day, the Accord's continuity session closed. The closing was formal, a block-by-block ratification of the session's procedural record, a statement from the presiding body, and then a period called the open floor that was technically optional and functionally unavoidable, since the open floor was where delegations made statements for the record that they hadn't wanted formalized during the working sessions. Most of these statements were diplomatic boilerplate. Most of them were addressed to the hall at large. The Queen of the Vhari Continuum requested the floor near the end. She stood at the main podium, the central one, equal to every other podium in the hall, uniform and undifferentiated, and she addressed the session. "The Vhari Continuum," she said, "submits for the record an acknowledgement. This session has been conducted in the standard form, with the standard courtesies, and we are satisfied with the procedural record. We submit additionally an acknowledgement of a different kind." She paused. "It is the practice of the Vhari court to formally witness significant recognition. I am exercising that practice now." The hall was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when something unexpected has happened, and no one has yet decided how to respond to it. She turned, not toward the block tables, toward the gallery. Toward him. Calder was in his usual seat, third from the left, second row. He had been taking notes. He was no longer taking notes. "There is a human observer in this gallery," she said, "whose name is Calder Mace, who holds a third-tier attaché designation from the United Earth Assembly, who has been present in this hall every day of this session, who sat quietly when the sessions were long and the work was difficult, and the temptation to be elsewhere was available to him. I am naming him for the record. Not for his designation or his function, but because my people have a word for someone who stays when they don't have to." She paused. "We witness them." The gold in her eyes was fully present. The bioluminescence across her skin had deepened to its full range, silver white at the surface, and beneath it, the steady, slow pulse of violet. "I finally remember you," she said, quietly enough that it should not have carried across the hall. It carried. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Calder had ever heard. He was aware of the gallery around him, other observers, a few secondary delegates, a cluster of staff members, and he was aware of the hall floor below, the block delegations, the Sorvathi representative, the presiding body, all of them still, all of them having just heard something that they would be trying to classify for the rest of the session and probably longer. He was aware that this was not a small thing. That Teva had tried to warn him, in her precise and careful way, that the court would have opinions, that those opinions were probably already forming in the heads of the 8 delegation members arranged behind the Queen, some of whom he could see, from this angle, had gone very still. He was aware of all of this, and it occupied approximately 1/4 of his attention. The rest of it was on her. She was looking at him with the gold fully in her eyes and the light moving in her skin, and the expression of someone who has been waiting to say something for a very long time, or who has been waiting for 1100 years through a chain of mothers who carried the shape of something without knowing what it belonged to, and who has now placed it where it goes. He didn't know what to do with any of this. He was third tier. He was here because of a broken wrist. He did the thing he usually did when he didn't know what to do. He stayed. He was still in his seat when the session formally closed. He was still there when the delegations filed out. He was still there when the gallery emptied around him, and the hall's uniform lights shifted to their post-session, dimmer setting. Teva found him there. "She wants you to come," she said. He stood up. His notes were a single page from the entire session, and most of it was blank. "I know," he said and went. Part 6, the shape of it. In the sovereign suite, the formal court dress was already gone. She was at the window again, the small one, the one with the slightly different angle on the gas giant, and she had changed into something simpler, a garment in the Vhari style that was not quite a robe and not quite anything he had a word for, and her arms were bare, and the bioluminescence moved freely across them in its full range, unheld. He came to stand near her. Not at the window, near it. "That was not a small thing," he said. "No," she turned. "Are you angry?" "No," he thought about it. "I don't think you did it for the spectacle. I don't think you do things for spectacle." "I don't," she looked at him steadily. "I did it because Vhari witnessing is real. When we name something in the record, it is real. I wanted it to be real." He thought about Sarava, the scholar keeper, 1200 years gone, stationed at a neutral ground archive with a human researcher who stayed when he could have left. He thought about the shape of a thing passing forward through a chain of women who carried it without knowing what it fit. "What happens now?" he said. "That depends on what you want." She moved from the window closer and stopped at a distance that was neither formal nor informal but something that was its own thing, undefined. "The session is closed. Your rotation is complete. You will have a document to produce." "I'll have a document to produce," he agreed. "And the UEA's administrative office will have 4 people who read it." "Give or take," he paused. "You looked at the roster." "I looked at the roster." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile but the shape of one, the place where a smile would go if she let it. "Your summary will note that the Vhari delegation participated in the continuity session with full procedural compliance." "It will." "And that the session was unremarkable." He looked at her. The gold was settled in her eyes, steady, no longer tidal, and the light in her skin was at its full range, unhurried. She was looking at him the way she had looked at the gas giant, large and old and clarifying, the way you look at something real. "I don't know," he said, "if I can put what happened in a summary document." "No," she said, Some things are not for the record. She reached out and placed one long-fingered, light-filled hand over his, not clasped, not grasping, just placed, the gesture of someone who is naming a thing and not yet sure what the name is. "I asked you to stay through the session," she said. "Yes. The next session begins in 3 weeks." He was quiet. "I am not asking you to be Sarava's human," she said. "I know you are not him. I know the pattern is not a contract." Her eyes held his. "I am asking you to stay because you are the one who is here, and because when I look at you I recognize the shape of something real, and because I would like to understand what that means, in person, with time." The First Minister was somewhere behind him. He could feel the precise weight of her attention, that 40-year vigilance, aimed at this moment. The gas giant turned out the window in its deep and patient way. Calder looked at the queen of the Vhari continuum, who had 11,000 years of continuous government and the biological memory of her entire maternal line, and who was asking a third-tier UEA attaché with a summary document to produce to stay. "I'll need to request an extension from the administrative office," he said. She considered this. "Is that difficult?" "I've never done it before. I've also never been witnessed in a galactic hall before." She looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, the thing her face had been doing the shape of became the thing itself. It was a small smile, restrained. Vhari, not the broad expression of someone who is used to performing warmth, but it was real. "No," she said, "I imagine you haven't." She didn't move her hand. He didn't either. In the corridor outside, Teva stood with her arms folded and her face in the expression of someone who has been doing math and does not fully like the result, but has arrived at it honestly. The other 7 delegation members were clustered at the end of the corridor, speaking among themselves at a volume that communicated opinion without quite crossing into objection. Teva looked at them, she looked at the door. She thought about 40 years of watching the Queen in every kind of room, in every kind of difficulty, in every session and negotiation and incursion and challenge. And she thought about the quality of the stillness that had been in the sovereign suite before the door closed, and she thought about the expression on the Queen's face when she had named him in the hall. She thought about 1100 years of a shape without a fit. She turned to the delegation members at the end of the corridor. "The session has closed," she said precisely. "We will review the procedural record in the morning." She looked at the door one more time. "Leave the Queen her evening." Through the small window in the sovereign suite, the gas giant turned. The banded surface moved in its deep and patient way, enormous and indifferent, the way things are that were here before memory and will be here after. Inside, there was a woman with light moving in her skin and gold in her eyes, and a man who had stayed when he didn't have to, and the quiet between them was not empty but full of the weight of something 1200 years old settling, finally, into the shape of something new. They stood at the window and watched the planet turn. The door was still closed. The light was narrow and warm through the gap at the bottom, the way light is when a room is occupied, and the people inside it are not yet ready to name what they are, but are beginning to, slowly, carefully, in the way that real things begin. And